without further ado, we're going to go ahead and turn on the cameras in the classroom and give you all an opportunity. We'll do some time just being silent and observing, so write down your questions, and I will answer the questions that I can. Margaret may have some insights that I don't, and then anything we can't answer, or and Shelley and Bevan can speak to after we've observed. Okay, so can you spotlight these videos? There we go. You can switch. Okay, great. That'd be great. So there's Max working with the timeline of life. You can see some of this I can't really tell what the work is, but these are nomenclature cards. Oh, parts of a frog, it looks like, right? And creating a booklet on parts of the frog. That's where the other. That's okay. Got some math going on here. Looks like move to abstraction in math for materials. E-frame is also a math work on the left. I'll talk to you over there in a couple minutes. That on the right in the Red Bugs classroom is a grammar work, right? So those are all different parts of speech that they've taken sentences and broken down the different parts of speech, emphasize them with different, they're called grammar symbols. And they all are different shapes and colors.
It's like the girls are doing the external features of the amphibian.
Margaret, can you speak up a little?
Oh, sure. It sounds like in the mulberries, they're doing the external features of the amphibian.
Great.
What is this box specific to?
I mean, this is what we learned as sentence diagramming, except that it's just very visual and concrete. Each word of speech has its own symbol, and so it symbolizes the function of words in the sentence.
Yep. So what does it look like when you read the sentences together?
Looks like this child is making a timeline of life.
Oh, Black History timeline.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the families is recommending that we mute both sides for a little bit so that we can share with you what we're seeing. So, Margaret,
I'm not familiar with this specific project, but I just read it looks like a timeline of Black history.
Okay.
That she's working on doing research and documenting significant events there.
I think you all can get a sense though of the kind of the sound in the classroom. Like it's not loud, but they're definitely talking and engaging, and that's a big piece of Montessori's. We're not asking them to sit quietly and work by themselves. It really has to, at this level, we want them to be collaborating, not all the time, for certainly, you know, there's also work on their own, but you can see this group of children working together on the right. It looks like they're doing some kind of research together.
Yeah,
and those are those are the questions that Shelley and Bevan will be able to speak to more of what the work that they're, actually doing. I'm sorry, Margaret, I didn't mean to cut you
Oh,
off.
that's okay. It just looks like 2 of them are doing geography and the other 2 are working on an operation, some math operation with the stamp game. I couldn't see their paper exactly, but that's the stamp game, which it can be used. Oh, it may be addition, I think I see on his cover, but you can use that for all 4 operations.
And then we have a map. Yeah.
Map of Europe.
Is that Asia? Yeah. And then let's see what we've got going on here. It looks like this child on the left is also working on math because that's called the bead frame. And you can also use that bead frame. So in our math is broken down by different skills. And when a child has gone to the bead frame from the stamp game, it means that they're ready for the next level of abstraction. So they're not jumping from a material directly into abstraction. You build abstraction through, like they start with actually the bank game, then they move into the stamp game, then they move on to what this is called the bead frame. Okay, so Shaney's class, let's see, we've got.
Yeah, the student on the mat is working on memorization of facts. So pulling out these little tiles that have math facts on them. And I'm not sure I can't see what tool he's using to compute the answers, whether he's using counters or a number line, or he's at the point where he's just computing them in his head, but working on speed and accuracy of those addition facts. And I see in the mulberries, we have another student working on external parts of the reptile this time though.
Yeah. Oh, reptile. So that, just so you all know, when they are working on something that's science, that is part of our science curriculum, but it also has an incredible amount of language because the words that they're going to be using are like, I still remember for that they have like carapace for the shell and they're using scientific terms and then they're going to, oh, see?
There it is. You remembered.
I remembered. I haven't used that word in a long time. And they then they have to read the definitions and they're basically, it looks like they're sorting and symbol and really having to read and understand and do that sorting, which is a scientific undertaking. And then they move that also into the language. The child on the right, what is this work, Margaret? Do you know? Very interesting. Huh, I haven't seen that work before. Now, would it be helpful for us to pull back and see the whole rooms again for you all? If you could tell us what you would like to see, that would be great. I think we've made it around to everybody's individual work.
Personally, for me, this is Dave. I'm getting the most out of you guys describing specifically kind of what they're doing, as opposed to sort of watching a crowd move around a room. That's giving me a better insight, but that's just me. So.
Okay, great. That's helpful.
I have a question.
Please.
So I saw, was it Abby working on a Black History Month timeline?
Uh-huh. Looks like.
Yeah, so that's one of the, like, let's say, big topics. So was there a lesson given to the kids, or did she do the research, or like what's the first period and second period? And
listen to you, Monica. You sound like a Montessori teacher with your first period, second period. Right on. I cannot answer that, but if you can stay until I think Abby's in Shelley's class, that you can, let's ask that question specifically. Oh, Black history of Underground Railroad. Okay, so that we're solving the puzzle here. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, that's helpful, Liz. And it would be, you can absolutely ask Shelley and Bevan how they're, what work they're doing around that. I will share with you all that I sent out a big DEI letter not too long ago, and if you made it through it, it was pretty long. We are rolling out curriculum this month. We've been working with the staff, but we are rolling out curriculum where we're really working on having a weekly curriculum around anti-bias, anti-racist work. So, and I know that some of the classrooms have certainly, built in somewhat in that Dr. Montessori had really some frameworks that she was very smart about even 100 years ago. And we recognize that there's more work to be done. And so we've really been, we've been working on that. So.
Yeah.
And Monica and George are actually coming in to present, so they know that.
The work in the room,
please.
If you can, I got booted out for a minute, but I'm back. I was observing the other day when these two young ladies got this first lesson from Miss Shelley, and these are the sort of internal body systems of every animal. So they're cue cards about how do they move, what type of respiration do they have, how do they reproduce, and then the students can choose an animal and answer those questions for that particular animal. There's research involved and classification of the animal kingdom there. And I'll see in a minute what animal that they're choosing to do this work with, but they're clearly doing follow-up. Ms. Shelley, after the lesson, had asked them to choose, I think it was an amphibian, and then of their own choosing, and practice going through this process on their own. So she's stopping by to either see how this work is going, or perhaps they're presenting their findings to her.
Sorry, the lesson is called Parts of the...
These are the, I'm blanking for a minute because it's not the external characteristics. It's sometimes called several different things, but these are the like internal systems.
Okay.
That's another great, Monica, please write down your question.
Yeah, have Shelley tell you the name of the lesson. I can't remember.
Because the truth is neither Margaret nor I have been in the classroom for me, I think it's been about 14 years.
Oh, this is neat. In the Red Buds, you're seeing the student's work journal where he or she is recording the goals that he may have set for himself or with a guide this morning, and then it's going to check those off.
So for just to be fully transparent, my questions are informing what I do with Isabella right now. So we're just looking to see what is it that we should be doing, I could be doing, and so it's kind of drawing inspiration right now.
So glad to hear it. Isabella deserves to have, the best education that she absolutely can. So we Montessori is really beautiful that way, that we really want people to have access to this information and, be working in this model is such a powerful model for children. I think the piece to, when you see the whole room is to really be able, you're looking at the purpose that the children have, right? They're responsible for themselves. Nobody's standing over them saying, you have to do this, you have to do this. But the work of the classroom, they know they come to school to work and to self-construct as human beings. And so it is their job to be purposeful with their time. A purpose with their time can look different obviously it looks different for each child and where they are in their own process. Margaret, do you want to speak to
on the right is working on addition facts, but using the bead bar manipulatives. So not quite, working towards the memorization, but instead of counting on fingers or other, she's implementing the bead bars, and some fingers to compute those facts.
We're seeing some of the notes on the child's work who's doing the history of Black history timeline.
Wow, cool. Obey now. Wow. Looks like these boys are in the Redbud classroom are working on the timeline of life, which is one of the great lessons that's delivered every year in the Montessori classroom. It's part of this overarching framework of great stories that are told that set a context for all the other materials and lessons in the classroom. Timeline of life is the second great lesson and goes through evolution, from before there was life on Earth all the way up to the emergence of humans. And there's so many different ways that students can branch off of that. One might become fascinated with trilobites or another ice ages or volcanoes, and or just interested in the timeline itself. So I'm not exactly sure which piece these two boys have chosen, but it's such an amazing springboard.
And it looks like the child on the left my guess is she's probably doing a book report of some sort. And because then you can see that in elementary, the books do become, the child can manage the information of, like, we know, I think there's an alligator wearing clothes. That's okay. She does, that she knows that alligators don't really wear clothes by the time they get into elementary.
She's on an apostrophe hunt. So she's had a lesson on contractions. So she's going through a book looking for examples and breaking them apart, I believe.
Oh, wow. Okay, good for her. So it's not a book report. Oh, right. Thank you. Thank you, Liz.
I know. They're really helping us out here.
Yeah.
He's in the Redbuds classroom. This boy is doing some grammar symbolizing. I can't see the words on the page, but
has he gotten them there yet?
maybe.
Sometimes part of what they'll do, I think this is what he's doing. Sometimes they plan, like they'll study in sentence analysis, we look at how language has patterns. And so sometimes they'll decide, I want to create a sentence that has this pattern. So it's going to have an adjective and then a noun and then a verb and then a contraction. I'm getting a thumbs up. Okay.
Okay, great.
So see, I'm polite. 15 years it's been. So he's creating a sentence. He created the pattern, and now he's going to find the language to actually match the pattern of the parts of speech that he's laid out.
That's actually a lot harder. That's sort of the next level. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's when you are ready for that next challenge. And part of the beauty of Montessori is they're taking this language and, they're taking something that, do you guys remember learning about grammar? I was so bored out of my brain. I think it was 5th, 6th grade. And I just remember just thinking, I didn't really care about, I wasn't invested in it. And when they're learning it at this age, even our kindergartners start often to learn a few of the parts of speech. And then when they do it in lower L, they're like, oh my gosh, words have jobs. Do you know that words have jobs? And they're actually find it inspiring oftentimes to be able to work with words like that. What are these guys doing over here, Shani? Shani, can you hear us? What are we? If we can see what they're doing.
Division. I
Oh,
had to turn
division.
upside down, but division.
Abstraction, division. Okay.
I have a question.
Please.
When they eat, like if it's cold outside, how do they deal with masks off and eating?
We have the desks in the classroom. You can see a lot of the tables. There are children working together. One of the commitments we make is that we tell people we're not going to keep them 6 feet apart, but all day. But when they eat, they are all at separate tables and as far apart as possible in the classroom, and they sit and eat. So that's how we manage it. I will say to date, we haven't had a single case of transmission at school. Not one. I'm knocking on wood that we get to keep saying that, but that's where we are. And part of it is they're showing that children are not transmitting in schools. Schools are a lot safer than originally people knew they would be, and that children are not really transmitting at school the way, and it's not transmitting on surfaces the way that originally was thought. So, but when they eat, they have tables spread out around the room and they eat. Yeah.
I love how you can see, how the assistants in these 2 rooms are supporting the guides by moving around the room to answer questions or just, check in on someone, but they're not being obtrusive. So they won't go and interrupt a child who's concentrating. They'll only help when they're needed. And of course, getting down at eye level, Tristan's about, 6'5" or something. So he has to scrunch way down.
Yeah.
And he does it, so that he can have an eye-to-eye conversation with the student.
I think the students are really enjoying him. That's the feedback we're getting.
So is that a new teacher or?
So when we had to hire another person, well, the dual language person left mid-year, right? And so we ended up hiring another person for that dual language classroom. So he's the replacement, and he's great. He's great. I see a long future for him in Montessori. And Monica, I don't think you know this, but we separated the 2 classrooms when we hired another guide. And so right now we actually have 3 lower elementary guides because we have an online guide, and then we have 2 guides in the classroom, so that these 2 classrooms can be totally separate.
Okay.
So one side, I think at this point, it's 13 students on one side and there are 18 students on the other side.
Okay.
Do you want to talk about this work on the right a little, Margaret?
Sure. This is again part of the grammar sets of materials. This is called a grammar box. So as each part of speech is introduced, students work through these grammar boxes. They have command cards in them. And it'll include a sentence like erase the board, and what's really fun is that students can act out the action if it's the verb box. Then they'll symbolize the sentence, they'll transpose the sentence, and it really solidifies this concrete understanding of the parts of speech before they move on to the next one. So by the time they're done in lower elementary, they'll have been introduced to all of the parts of speech and be doing the more advanced work, like creating their own patterns, analyzing pieces of literature. And this ties into writing too, because then when you're doing your writer's workshop and you're talking about how to make your writing more rich and detailed, well, what do we need to add? Like, let's look at some colorful adjectives and adverbs to make our writing richer. So it's really nice how everything ties together. And here Tristan is disinfecting. So this is part of your question, Monica. Materials are disinfected after each use and put back on the shelf, which is a huge undertaking and unfortunately does take up a lot of the time of our assistant guides, but with our smaller class sizes, you know, it's manageable and just part of what we have to do right now. And so I mean, you can see there are a lot of pieces there. So, but he's also keeping an eye on the room and available to students who need him simultaneously.
Are there any specific pieces of work that you all would like us to go back to? Is this helpful to see, you know, like help us make this as productive of use of your time as possible?
Let's see, what is that? Multiples of numbers. So these girls are working on finding multiples. Looks like they've already had an introductory lesson. And they may be, I'm not sure quite yet, if this is a lesson or a check-in.
Shani, can you turn on your sound for a second? We'll totally listen in.
6, okay. Can you grab the 5 chain and the 6 chain from our cabinets?
I think you're right.
They're coming back. They're going to get the 5 chain and the 6 chain.
Okay, so they're going to find lowest common multiple of 5 and 6 using the chain, which they've been using since they were 3 years old in the children's house classroom for learning to count and skip count and learn sequence. But now they've been used for learning multiplication.
Shani, can you turn off your sound for a second again, and we'll let Margaret, can you say what you're saying again? Because we can't really hear you that well. And
then sorry. Sure. I was just saying what's really neat about this is the students are having a lesson on lowest common multiple using these bead chains that they've been using since they were 3 years old. They first used them just for sequential counting and skip counting and building concentration. And since then they've used them for learning multiplication facts. And now they're able to use this material to find the lowest common multiple by, they're probably going to compare each bead chain one to another, and they have a table there and just by comparing these bead chains, find which numbers they have in common and which of those is the lowest, which is something that we all learned in school just sort of by memorizing the algorithm for it, but they're actually going to understand what that means, like what those numbers have in common. So of course, eventually this will become an abstract understanding so that they no longer use the bead chains. But by starting with the concrete materials, they'll really have a foundation of understanding that concept.
Okay, Shani, you want to turn back on your sound?
Right. So what color do we want to start with? Why don't we all choose one color? Yeah, you're blue. What start? Perfect. I'm gonna start with red. And let's go every 5. What's the first one on our 5 chain? 5. Do we see a 5 down here? Where's our 5? Let's go ahead and circle it. What will we circle next?
So again, he's taking a concept and really helping them that they, Shani, thank you. Go ahead. Margaret, you should speak to this.
Oh, I was just saying first they're circling the multiples of 5, then they'll circle the multiples of 6 and see which ones overlap. Those would be the common multiples.
Perfect.
We have a comment in the chat, Tamara.
Yeah.
Laura is hoping to see someone using Spanish materials. And can we give an update kind of on what's happening regarding dual language in the Redbuds classroom?
Sure. Laura, I don't want to speak to that. I know we have that Tristan and Bevan asked for a little time to get Tristan settled in. I know that my understanding is they're planning on rolling that back out. We're actually right around now, but let's ask Bevan that question so that you get a real answer, because I don't want to say something that's not accurate.
Okay,
Yeah, so
Holden said the Spanish material boxes that they used to be able to work with, previously are still on the other side of the classroom. So I don't know if, I can ask Bevan too, if there's an intent to move those over too. I just, neither kid they're both saying they're not getting any Spanish. So I was kind of hoping to see that they actually were getting some. So
I don't think that, I have to say that I think that, Margaret, I think you talked to Bevan about this. Is that right?
Right. They wanted to spend that first, month, 6 weeks that you spend sort of acclimating and training a new assistant to really get their routines in place and build those relationships. And Tristan is also teaching writers workshop and literature circles. So he's taken on a lot all at once. So make sure that that's very intentionally rolled out and adding the Spanish piece back in. So, but as for timing, let's ask Bevan where they are with that, because this is about the time we were thinking he'd be able to take the next step.
And I will say that our expectation is that he's able to do it regularly now that the classroom is divided and it's a smaller class size than we've had in the past. And before, when Bevan was splitting, Chrissia was only able really to give Spanish lessons when Bevan was on her side. So now with Bevan being there all the time, we expect that it will be a daily activity. I mean, that's how we've had it in the past, right? So, but it definitely, I know that that's been a piece that really Bevan said, wait a second, we need to catch our breath here. So. Is there anything else that you all would like to see today before we kind of wrap this up and bring the guides in? Oh, look, he did look at his work.
Oh, I wish I could read what he read. That's cool.
Oh, here's that child, getting out the checkerboard. You want to talk about the checkerboard, Margaret?
Oh, I love this material. This is for multiplication. All the way into the millions and 100 millions this board goes. Again, very concrete at first, where the multiplier and multiplicand are represented with bead bars, and then the student actually, combines them and exchanges in order to find the product. But also by learning to record this on paper as they go, enables the student to gain eventually this abstract understanding of what multiplication is. And this is just a beautiful material.
Oh, looks like Shelley's about to get into a lesson.
Yeah.
Tamara, you were saying that there are 18 kids in one classroom and less in the other.
Mm-hmm.
Which class, so which teacher is with which group?
The dual language class is the larger side, so that's with Bevan. And then the children who don't have a dual language background or who opted in to the smaller classroom are in with Shelley and Sherry.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Is there a way that, I don't know if we can pull Shelley right now before she starts with full on with the student. I hate to interrupt that lesson, but we probably, if we want to have time for the guides to be able to join us and answer some of these questions, we definitely want to wrap up here. Is there anything else you all want to see before we bring the guides in? Works a child working on her reading. The piece that just as a whole, you know, when you're looking at different models, and I know some of you are looking at Montessori versus a progressive program or a more conventional program. One of the things that's really miraculous in a Montessori classroom is that intrinsic motivation, and the children, you can see that in action today. You know, when you look around, the children are working, nobody's standing over them to work. It's the ethos of the classroom is work, and the ethos of the classroom is that they're able to make those choices on their own and really engage in work. And when you think about it, these children are 6 years old, they're 7 years old, they're 8 years old, and they have that level of inner discipline to be able to function with, of course, the structure and the support, but to be able to function making these choices. And these are skills that oftentimes you can see young adults coming out of school, out of college, who have not yet built the inner discipline to be able to manage themselves and their time in that way, and also the motivation to continue to be a lifelong learner and to grow their own knowledge and grow their own skills. And so that's the piece. Now, obviously, every child is unique. Every child is in their own process. There's no magic pixie dust. You know, every child is going to have challenges. That's how life is. It's the challenges that teach us the most, for sure. And I think overall, you get a sense of the work that they're doing here. You know, learning about the world and learning about the environment, and really studying different types of animals and different levels of math and different and language. And it's such a rich environment for their learning and their growth.
Yeah, and you can see that children are getting lessons as they're ready for them. And if that's just one child who's ready at that moment for a lesson, then it's an individual lesson. If it's two, then two can come. And it doesn't have to be 2 third years. It can be a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old who are ready for that lesson at the same time. And, you know, the children can share their strengths with each other and also be lifted up, you know, in the areas where they need more practice and inspired by other students. So you really see that nice individualized aspect here as we're taking a peek around. There's someone having snack.
And waving. Hi, Mom.
I told her she could wave and I would see her.
Totally.
That's so cute.
I am eating my snack, Mom. I'm eating my vegetables first, or whatever, right? All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and ask Bevan, if you don't mind, Shani and Liz, to ask Bevan and Shelley to join us. And if they ask for a couple minutes to kind of get a setup outside of the classroom as well. And we will have them join us, and you guys can ask your questions to them. And do any of you all have questions that maybe came up, or thoughts, reflections as you're watching this? Is this what you expected to see? Is it different?
It's amazing.
I think it's amazing, but I'm working. I do think it's amazing. Yeah, it's you know, we're meeting them where they are, which is the work of the educator, and is to really keep them inspired and connected with the material so they can self-construct. It's their work, right? It's their work.
Hi, it's Medina. So I appreciated getting to see the more social aspect of how things are in the classroom, given that there's been some changes this year. I would welcome the opportunity to have another session where we could view at a different time of the day. Also, just to get a fuller picture of what happens in the afternoon versus, maybe this is a sweet spot, maybe the afternoon isn't so much of a sweet spot for the kiddos. Just to kind of see how the dynamics may change throughout the day. I'm familiar with the works. Yeah, for me, it was more of the socialization and just the flow of the classroom. So I appreciated getting this experience to look into it today.
So what you're seeing today, right now, Medina, is the work cycle for sure. And it's a protected work cycle, and we're really proud of that. It's a 3-hour protected work cycle. And so you're getting to see, you just saw, I think you guys saw what, maybe 45 minutes of protected work cycle, right? There is definitely, even within the work cycle, there's a time where children, we call it false fatigue, right? It's where you and I would take maybe a coffee break or a tea break, and they go and they have that, you'll see them kind of get up and they kind of herd up as a community. And then if you give them some time, they generally go back into a deeper level of work for the day. So that's a piece of it. And then often in the afternoons is more like literature circles, writers workshop, enrichment programs. So that's also what you see in the afternoon. So, I'm not opposed to that. I will share with you, we've got to get through the first round. We're doing this for every level and every classroom. And, it's a significant commitment of our administration's time to supporting our families and making sure that you guys can see what's going on, right? And it's the same respect, it's the same, expectations for the students of how they operate during all of those pieces. But the afternoons is more chunked up. Margaret, you can speak to the schedule better than I.
The other interesting piece about the afternoons is we've had to modify our enrichment this year. Literature circles and writers workshop are with the classroom assistant, so that's within the pod. But for art, music, PE, Spanish, we have, our enrichment guides can't cross-contaminate across classrooms, so they have to deliver their content online. And so the children are watching their enrichment guide live on a screen, which is just, not quite as exciting to see in an observation. And we are making it work, but of course we're all eager to go back to when all of our enrichment guides can be fully live and in person with all of our classes.
Margaret, I have a question about literature. You said literature circle?
Yes.
I think I'm not familiar with that. Is that something new or?
It is something, we've had various forms over the years. We've used junior great books and different guides have done different things. But this year we did implement literature circle for the entire elementary level. We did some training before school started. And it's just a slightly different model where different smaller groups of students are reading the same book or short story. And then there's a structure around which those literature discussions are framed. So it's nice because the adult leading it, once they've sort of developed the routine, the students completely take over that discussion, and they have different roles such as discussion director, summarizer, luminary, vocabulary finder, and then they have a discussion that's based more on characteristics of literature and enjoyment of literature. So that's not a how to read type of lesson, that is literature based.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Well, welcome Bevan and Shelley. So nice to have you all. We're going to spotlight you all's videos so that you can be nice and big for everybody. And so we have, first of all, do you all want to say a few words just about the morning, and is that a normal work cycle, and what were we seeing? And then some folks have some questions for you.
Want to go first, Bevan?
Sure. For one, thank you all for being here. I'm realizing I look like a ghost in the light in this room. Yeah, so this morning's work cycle from the Redbud perspective, there was a variety of work going on. Probably this morning, I was actually interested to see how this morning would go, just because we had 2 days off, and then yesterday was our enrichment day, and this is really the only full day of class that the students get. And from my perspective, this morning it was how a normal work cycle would go. The students start out in the morning filling out their work record journals, determining what they are going to do for the day. I do ask the first years to share that with me to sort of help get the executive functioning piece going. And then they get into work, and that is a choice of a bunch of different things. You saw probably this morning grammar box work, so working with the parts of speech. You would have seen different types of math work. Students, there's pre-made booklets that they'll go to use. I believe the timeline of life was out. We have some students very interested in looking through that. And there were other things too. I think some political maps and Mr. Tristan walking around to make sure that everyone feels engaged. And yeah, that's a very brief synopsis of all the things that you saw.
Mulberries.
Shelley, you just froze up. Oh no. Shelley, I don't know if you can hear me, but you have frozen.
Camera, I'm gonna run downstairs and try to support that.
Okay.
Kim, I'm in the library. If she wants to join me, we can use the same screen.
Okay, all right.
You cannot use the same screen. You are, no, you cannot be masked.
Sorry, you're right. I forgot. I'm still getting used to that.
But I know you've been used to going back and forth between. So I'm gonna let while Shelley's getting kind of outfitted here. Did anybody have any questions specifically for Bevan on anything that they saw?
Hey, Bevan, this is Serena. I saw the boys there working on the timeline of life. I was just wondering if you could describe a little more what that work entails.
Sure. So yeah, at the beginning of the year, in the elementary community, we call it the 5 great stories. And a lot of that is how we introduce the different areas of the curriculum to lower elementary and to the elementary child. And the timeline of life is one of the ways that we introduce not just history, but also biology. And as you saw, it's a very large timeline, and it goes from the first little amoeba that we talk about in the great story of the coming of life, and it goes all the way to human beings. So there's a lot of different things, a lot of different types of information that the children can look at and get from that timeline, and a lot of different ways they can utilize it. The ways that those boys were using it today is actually they're doing a couple things. One, they're going through the process of looking at the different years. Sorry, hold on 1 second. I see Shelley's coming on in. Okay, so one of the things that they're doing is they're reading through, right, and they're getting a sense of the different periods of time, the different creatures that would have come in the different periods of time. I think we were mentioning this yesterday, Serena, but in our conference, but the Jurassic period is a huge hit, right? Children love to learn about dinosaurs. So they'll go through, they'll read with each other, with their friends, they'll look up words that they might not know, or they might ask each other words that they don't know, come up with those pronunciations. And then what those students are particularly doing right now is they're writing down facts that they find on the timeline. And they're able to then share that with each other, with themselves, and they're actually compiling, as you saw, they're taping together and almost making their own booklet on the different facts and information that they're finding on that timeline.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Shelley, let's try it again from your, to have you get started.
Sorry, Wi-Fi issues. So I'm moving around, gradually around the school until I find, and I know it says Liz and I haven't had the chance to rename it, but I am Shelley. So yeah, that in some ways I would say it was a very typical work cycle room, but just like Bevan said, you know, this is our first real day of work cycle this week, as yesterday was a special day. Also, we have a brand new student who's just joined us from our virtual classroom. So this was only her second day in person. So with those two things in mind, it was typical, but I was also aware that I was juggling, being very aware of having a new student who actually did beautifully. So she fitted right in. So I'm very proud of her for that. So what you saw was me giving lessons. So I tend to do lessons in two different ways. When I plan weekly, I'm looking at how the students have done. I'm using my observations. I'm seeing who needs what, and I'm planning accordingly. And I also have in mind that I want to make sure that I'm touching on certain lessons with children and moving through the curriculum. So what I do, and not every Montessori teacher does this, but what I tend to do is I tend to give certain curricular lessons on certain days. So Thursday happens to be a day when I focus on science and zoology. So those were the lessons you were seeing. But equally, I think you probably saw that I will then step out of that and then respond to what a child needs. So I sat with someone who needed just a little bit of review on a math lesson, for example. So it's that combination of the planned lessons that I planned to give and then responding to the children as and when I see it. So that's probably what you saw me doing. And you saw a variety of work. There was lots of cultural work going on because I find, especially after we've had a break, it's a great way to pull them back into that normalized work cycle again. You also saw some math and I think some language work. So I would say that was a pretty typical work cycle in the Mulberries.
Great, great. What other questions do you all have for these folks?
I'll ask my Bevan. I can talk more about this with you tomorrow.
Laura, you muted yourself. There you go. There you go.
Still learning. Sorry, Bevan. I can talk more about conferences, but just wanted to get a general idea. I was kind of hoping to see some kids working on Spanish materials today, and just kind of get an idea of how you're planning to work that back in.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, Laura, and that's something that to start the school year or the new year, I guess, 2021. I really wanted Tristan, and so I sat down with Tristan and Marcella, who is not just our Spanish teacher at Green Spring, but also she helps coordinate all the different dual language programs throughout the school. And we sat down that Monday where it was like a work day and the students weren't back yet, and discussed sort of what we wanted that all to look like. And my big thing for Tristan was making sure that he had the first month to really ground himself as an assistant, get to have these relationships or form the relationships with the children. That's not to say that he's not doing anything regarding Spanish right now. Most of what we're having for this first month of January is he speaks with the children in Spanish as a greetings and coming out or goodbyes as well. When he was doing lunch for a while. When he was doing lunch, he would speak to them about their lunch in Spanish. So like any opportunity he really has throughout the course of the day to speak to them in Spanish and have them hold a conversation is what he's doing right now. And that was pretty intentional from my part and also Marcella's. But actually, as of yesterday, Marcella and I and Tristan, we've been on a thread and we're starting, we have a bunch of Spanish materials already in the room. I know that there was some that are still on the other side that are coming back around. But my plan for Tristan and Marcella's and what we've been talking about is utilizing the box. So you would be familiar, Laura, with the boxes that Martha used before. And using those as a template for Tristan. And as he gets more familiar with the Montessori materials, then being able to give those Montessori materials / Spanish lessons. But right now we have a plethora of things. Marcella's going to be working with him on what the children know, since she knows their proficiency in Spanish right now. And we're going to start rolling that out next week is the plan. So hopefully that answers your question.
I have a question for Shelley. Shelley, how do you track each child's development. So how did you assess them? How you know what they're missing, what level they're at, and what's their plan going forward, and how do you track that?
That's a great question and a big question. So I do it in a variety of ways, as I'm sure probably most guides do. So a lot of what we talk about in Montessori is observation. And that doesn't, that can mean me sitting there and literally observing. But often when I'm sitting next to a child and working with them, that's a form of observation as well. So I'm giving lessons. For example, if I'm giving a math lesson on multiplication, I'm coming at it with, I know this child is this old. I know what the previous teacher has told me because I've had those conversations with Bevan. Bevan was phenomenal about talking to me about each child, or Stacey in some children's case. And then I'm pulling a lesson that I know, and I'm seeing if they are where they are. So based on what I learn in that lesson alongside that child, I then can devise my plan. So the Montessori curriculum is wide and long, and I trained all the way from lower L all the way through upper L. So I have 6 years of curriculum then, and then I'm kind of slotting them in where I feel they are. And that for me is the beautiful thing about Montessori, the fact that I have 3 grades, but I might have 5 years worth of span of children in my classroom. So I'm kind of, I'm using my observations. Also, do we use some formal assessments? Yeah, there are some formalized assessments, and they would help me with planning a very broad curriculum. They would show me if there were gaps. Sometimes, a child can do certain things and you start to work with them and realize, well, there's a gap here. We didn't quite get that. So we circle back.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of, and that's the beautiful thing. There's only 12 children right now in the Mulberry, so I get so much time to be with them, and having Miss Sherry in there full time really allows me to go deep and know each child and where they are in all the different curriculum areas. And also I think because it's so small, I can be really flexible with their groupings. So if a first grader fits better in a certain lesson with some second and third graders, that's what I do. Does that answer the question?
It does.
Well, and Shelley, you also do record keeping and planning on a regular basis so that you don't have to hold it all in your head, because it's so hard.
Yeah, and I should have, sorry, thank you, Margaret. Yeah, so when I plan weekly. So when I plan, I'm looking at the lessons that were previously given. And as I give a lesson, I'll often literally on sticky notes, generally, to be honest, literally write anything that I noticed. Then those sticky notes kind of feed into my planning when I plan the next lesson. The next lesson might be, okay, we need to circle back. The next lesson might be, we're going to move on. And their groups may switch around because I'll think, well, so-and-so and so-and-so need this lesson, but I need to circle back with another child. So everything feeds into that. And then I'm record keeping all the time based on the Montessori curriculum and where they are.
Thank you.
Shelley, do you want to talk a little bit about how you're doing, we saw the Black History Month up on the board, and that one of those children was working on a timeline of Black history?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a school, we're talking a lot about diversity, inclusion. We've talked at a lower L level, children are really engaged with the world. They're listening to conversations, they're seeing the news on, so we're having conversations about what's going on in the world a lot. So on Friday, because of conversations we've had around the election and, the riots that have happened, I read a book, which I'm going to do a shout out, which I shouldn't do now, but it's a really good book. It's a picture book called Race Cars. And we read this and we got into a really phenomenal conversation around privilege. So it was great for our vocabulary. We then talked about white privilege, and we talked and owned how this conversation might feel uncomfortable. And the children were really, I gave them the option of we'll stop the book here and we'll read the next half next week. And they didn't want to. Every child wanted to continue. So we got really into a big conversation, and then that fed into my planning at the weekend, I'll be honest. And I thought, okay, we need to understand, we need to put this in time. So we need to see privilege and racism for what it is and the history going there. Now, bearing in mind, I'm teaching 6 to 9 year olds. So am I teaching AP US history? No, I'm not teaching that. I'm fully aware of that. So I'm trying mainly through stories. So we read a story about Harriet Tubman this morning, and then we're trying to put that in context. And then that's feeding into work on timeline. So it's a very cross-curricular work. So I introduced it this morning with the whole class, and then certain children wanted to go with it. So I love that they really wanted to move forward with it. So I gave them some suggestions based on the timeline, and they're working with it. I personally feel that then really gives them ownership, and then they lead a lot of those conversations with me. And, you know, a lot of it is through stories and talking. And really my aim is to just give some historical context to the world that we're all in and we're all living in, and they are very aware of. So we have phenomenal conversations. We read a lot of books, and we talk a lot about discomfort and uncomfort, and sometimes we just have to sit in a little bit of discomfort, and that's okay. So that's really where I'm going with it. So I've kind of planned over the next few weeks to very gently and gradually go through history in a chronological, timeline, albeit in a very 6 to 9 year old way. So are we going to get deep into things? No, my aim is to give them an impression and to put the world events in some sort of context, and to give them a safe time and space to discuss their thoughts and feelings and ideas. Does that answer some of what we're doing in there?
Great, thank you. And Bevan, I saw that you were working on doing the timeline. I think it was of Life on Earth. It was hard to see. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the students were doing with the timeline? Maybe put in context the process that they would go through in the presentation, and then where they were in their own experience of relating to the timeline.
Sure, yeah. And I mentioned some of this earlier, but so at the beginning of the school year, we'll break out not just that timeline, but there are other materials as well to tell our 5th grade stories, which introduces different parts of the curriculum to the students. And one of those is the coming of life, the story of the coming of life. So up to this point, we've talked about the creation of the universe. There are a couple of different legacy lessons that have been passed down from Montessorians throughout the last, I guess, like 100 years. It's been a while, like since this curriculum's been around. So the big one being the creator with no hands or what have you. So it gives an impressionistic sense of how we maybe theorize different planets formed, stuff like that. And then moving forward, once we have a concept of, what does our planet look like? How did the planet form? What is it made up of? And start talking about life. And the first part, so we tell this great long story using that timeline. And the timeline is actually meant to be unrolled slowly as we're telling that story, starting with the very tiny, like the first organism that would have come around. And then how life started in the ocean and it comes onto land, and what was the first voice that was heard, maybe it was, what do you think the first voice that was ever heard outside of the water? The children might say frogs, and might make a ribbit sound or what have you, anything like that. And we keep unrolling it, and they get through the different periods. So this is, again, as I mentioned earlier, this is a way to speak about not just the history of life, but also biology and at times geology and geography, like where was this life inhabiting on the planet. And then the very, very end of the timeline, we have humans. And then there's actually a work or a lesson we give right after that, probably like the next day, called the Black Strip. And it's this gigantic piece of fabric that, if you can imagine the campus, it stretches from the parking lot just about past the adolescent building, and you unroll that big black strip, and it's retelling that same timeline story, and you get to the very end, and there's a little red strip on it, and that is meant to symbolize the amount of time that humans have been around compared to everything else that we know about time. So it's this sense of, wow, we haven't really been around that long, and look at all the things that have happened before that. So as far as the children's work goes, it varies greatly. You know, it can be the starting point of research for them, right? They might stick on to one particular life that they encounter on that timeline. I don't know why, but trilobites are like the biggest thing. I never knew what a trilobite was until I started working here, but the children are fascinated with them. And then of course, dinosaurs, the Jurassic period is a big conversation point. Cephalopods, you know, there's a really cool drawings of those. And so they go on. And what's really cool to me is it's not that they're not focusing on the existence of humans, but just for them to see everything that's really happened before. So what can the children do with this work? You saw the children today working on the timeline. They're writing down facts and they're gathering information. They're trying to gather as much as they can from that timeline, not just for themselves, but to share with each other. Like, look what I found. You know, this is what I found in the Jurassic period, or this is what I found in the Cambrian period, or what have you. They might find, like, let's use the trilobite as an example. They might look at that trilobite and say, why don't we have trilobites here anymore, right? That a really big part of that timeline is to spark curiosity. Why are some of these animals and organisms that we're seeing, why are they still on Earth? Why aren't they? You know, and they might come up to me and ask, and I will never overtly give them that answer, right? That's for them to determine, to find out. And my responsibility and our responsibilities as the adults in the room is to make sure, especially during COVID times, that they have enough information in the room where they can, and they know where to get it, where they can go and start to look these things up on their own. So, and the reason I say in COVID times is because when we're not in COVID, the position that we're all in as a world, normally the children might not have all the information they need in that room, right? In fact, that's very intentional. They might say, oh, I want to learn more about, the Jurassic period, and we might only have 2 books on it in the classroom, and they might have questions that those books don't answer. We want to really encourage them to look outside of the classroom and to, maybe even I've had students call like people that are experts on this and all sorts of things. So we have to be flexible with how we're doing it now, but yeah. So right now, those students are gathering facts. They're getting to a point where they
just did a 3-minute video.
Oh, sorry, yeah. But anyway, I know I can talk a lot. I gotta.
Hey, Bevan, this is Serena. You're talking about the trilobites. I should tell you, last year we went to Utah and we brought back as a gift to the class Trilobite Fossils. So if you could borrow that from Miss Sonia's class, maybe it's still there. That would be cool for the kids to see.
Fantastic. Thank you.
What other questions do you all have? Anything else before we close? I need to take a moment to underscore that it is a really special human being that can do the work of working in a Montessori classroom with children in this way. You have to bring a real commitment to humanity and be willing to leave your ego at the door and what oftentimes what you had set up for them, because you're following their interest, their curiosity. And for me, at least, it was very challenging to transition from a conventional environment because I had to let them go and do all their own things and not control all of them at the same time. Like I was a sage on the stage. I was really good in a conventional classroom, brought my charisma, was funny, but it was a very different skill set to come in and bring that level of preparation, as Shelley was talking about, for every child in every area of the curriculum and really watching them as individuals. And we are really grateful for both of you. So, and really for all of the people committed to doing this work. So I just wanted to go on the record and publicly say thank you to both of you for all of your hard work and all that you contribute to our children. It really is mission-based work.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else before we sign off? Look at us, 6 minutes early.
I just want to share really quickly, it was every day around here during COVID brings something special. And this morning was particularly a lot happening here on campus. And I have to share that I love going in our elementary classroom, our lower elementary classroom. Every single time I'm just amazed at the work they're doing and the focus I'm just blown away by it. And as you all weren't in the classroom, I just want to share the feeling that I had. I felt really, it was peaceful, it was happy, it was warm, it was, they were busy, they were focused, it just really grounded me. And I'm sitting here now feeling like I can handle my day because these children this is what we're doing. Like, this is the work, right? And they're just really happy to be here. They're getting the social thing that they need, right? They're up, they're moving around, they're getting a snack when they want, they're diving in and focusing on work with all of that. I mean, I have the camera, like I can't distract them if I try, like they are so focused on their work, and it's just really beautiful. So I wanted to share that feeling I had in there, because you're not able to have that feeling through the computer, but it's really spectacular, and I'm glad we're doing this, and I want to do more because it grounds me. So Thank you. Thank you, Shelley and Bevan, and Tristan and Sherry too. For all
of course. Of course. All right. Well, thank you all so much. And thanks for being here.